Hello and welcome back. This is Titus Valspar, and earlier we covered the champion rework for Carnage in the beta that's currently available, discussing the potential reworks. And now that we've kind of had a look at Carnage himself, we're going to take a look at the changes that have been suggested for Venom. Now we're still here in the main live server currently. Because we're going to treat this kind of the same way as we did in the last video. If you haven't seen that yet, feel free to go through and check that one out. But we're just going to do a brief review of what Venom's current state is, and then have a look at some of the adjustments and tweaks that have been made. And there've been some very interesting changes made to him. Some I feel are very unique and would definitely make Venom more useful under certain circumstances. This by no means, I feel, puts him to being a high tier or the next sought after character, but it definitely is an improvement from where he is currently. So let's just kind of have a look at what he currently has, and you'll see that my particular version of Venom I do have at max signature level, which currently has it in. It doesn't really do a whole lot for him. It's kind of handy in arena if I run up against somebody who's has suicide masteries, just kind of because of the way of that it works, which you'll see here. So Venom, his current signature ability titled Bloodlust, essentially gives him some additional crit damage whenever the opponent is bleeding, which would be decently okay if it weren't for the fact that uh, Venom has only a 7% chance currently to cause or inflict a bleed on the opponent. So if the opponent is currently bleeding, or with one of the attacks that you happen to get that 7% chance and get that bleed active, then he does get a relatively lackluster improvement to his critical damage rating. So not a whole lot going on for the character there. His passive ability allows him to activate a random buff once every 10 seconds. You know, if the fight goes on for a minute or so, you do have a couple of different things that could potentially help you. Not a whole lot really goes into this mechanic itself. I mean, it's kind of similar to what you see with Carnage, where you have either some additional physical resistance, some armor rating, some crit damage rating, additional crit rate, or increased attack. And the numbers aren't overly shocking, not really a whole lot of benefit to the character himself. And really the only cool mechanic that he does have is on currently off of his special attacks. He has varying percentages of being able to replicate or take advantage of an opponent's buff, whether that's a regeneration buff. I've seen it work with unstoppable buffs. Really any type of buff that the character has on them. If when using a special attack and making contact with the opponent, you've got a chance, varying in degrees of efficiency, increasing with the tiers of special attacks, to actually get that effect to replicate and benefit you. So really not a whole lot going for Venom currently, and then his synergies doesn't really have a whole lot listed there. But there have been quite a few changes and additions to the character with this suggested rework. So we're going to go ahead and hop into the beta and have a look at those changes which have been made. All right, so here we are. We've got the beta open once again, and like I mentioned in that last video, the resources which were supplied by Kabam to the beta testers allowed me to take both Venom and Carnage up to rank 5, which I've done. So let's go ahead and jump in, have a look at some of the specifics with Venom and the way that he has had these proposed changes. And there he is. So, and I've got him in the middle of a quest here just because of something that I want to showcase before moving on to a different piece of content that would be kind of cool. So let's just kind of have a look at his general overview. So you'll see that the title of his signature ability has changed, along with some additional synergies being added, which really kind of adds some interesting perks to the character. So let's walk through and kind of see the different reworks and options that have been made available for Venom here. So you'll see that instead of his signature ability granting him additional crit rate, you do see that his new proposed ability allows him at the beginning of each fight to start off with an additional buff. So instead of starting off with just the one like he does currently, he now starts off with 2 buffs, and the signature ability gives him a certain percentage chance to gain a 3rd buff, which when he's at maximum signature level, that's pretty much guaranteed. You're going to start each and every fight that you go into with 3 additional buffs to help you in with that fight. And the potency of those buffs also has an increase as well, which definitely helps to a degree. And as we take a look at the varying buffs that can be applied or that Venom can receive over the course of the fight, you'll see that the numbers are fairly similar as far as how they scale. So nothing really too noteworthy with the abilities themselves, though what we do want to take notice of is instead of every 10 seconds, this buff will refresh every 9 seconds. So one of these items will be applied every 9 seconds. And there actually is, you'll see when we get into the game, there's a timer that counts down so you know when you can expect that next buff to come through, which is a very handy mechanic to have added to him. And you'll also see that the maximum amount of buffs that he can have at any given time is 7, and that can be tweaked with that Carnage synergy that we saw previously, so that helps as well. So that would take his maximum to 8 if you take him in with a Carnage synergy, which would really be beneficial just based off of the way that these characters have been altered. But that isn't even close to where these changes or proposed changes to Venom are. So what you see here is this Clintar buff has a couple of interesting, I guess, quirks to it that it hadn't had previously. So the buff itself allows some additional attack rating for each. I believe that scales for each buff that he currently has on him. And you'll see that if he faces off against certain characters, there is a little bit of an extra benefit. So if he faces off against a hero, it's more likely that he's going to get a bleed. If he faces off against a Spider-Verse hero, he actually is an evade counter. So if you take him into a fight against classic Spider-Man, he ignores that passive evade, which is something that's really, really cool and handy for him to have, and it's actually fits in with his comic book canon. So that's a really cool tweak that they've made with that. And then against tech champions, you'll see that he has some power burn that can be factored in there, as well as he's immune to the effects of power drain. So if you go in against a Vision or somebody else who has that power drain function, at least for tech champions, he's not going to be affected by that. So a little bit of a benefit, additional benefit for taking him into a fight where he has class advantage. Now you'll see that heavy attacks here, he's been granted the ability to, with an armor break, which is a really cool mechanic that's been added. I haven't really played around with that too much, but it could serve as being fairly useful. The armor break is not insane, but who's going to argue with being able to have a little bit of some extra damage? Now, one thing that is really, really cool with the alterations that they've made is instead of having a 7% chance on all attacks for a bleed to be caused, you'll see that on critical hits there's an 80% chance for that bleed to be inflicted, and it's a little bit of a stronger bleed that lasts a little bit shorter, but overall it is a welcome change to see to the character. Definitely increases his use in terms of damage output. And before we kind of look at the specifics on the special attacks, you will notice that anytime the opponent is below 18% health, Venom gains True Strike and all of his special attacks become unblockable. This is very, very cool because it means that Venom is an automatic counter to Iron Man Infinity War's molecular armor. So as soon as he reaches that threshold where normally he would just auto block any of your attacks, this will completely negate that effect. So it's really cool that this is something they've added in. I'm really, really hoping that this is a main staple and not something that they'll make any additional tweak to before releasing the character into the game with these changes made, because that would just be so handy to know that there's somebody that you can reliably have that True Strike active when your opponent is at low amounts of health, and that would or low amounts of health, and that would also pair really nicely with the Assassin's Mastery, as True Strike also ignores armor and physical resistance, and just kind of gives you even more raw damage to opponents who are lower on health. Now, instead of, as far as the special attacks go, each special attack's perk itself has changed. The animations are still the same, but you'll see that with Special Attack 1, which has those 3 hits, each strike has a 55% chance to steal a buff on the character, but rather than taking that buff for himself like he did previously, it actually allows him to get a little bit of healing. So this number here equates to about 5% of the character's health. So, if the RNG were to line up correctly and you're facing off against somebody who has a lot of different buffs, for example, the Venom that's in Act 4, Chapter 3, if you faced off against him and got lucky enough and got a buff steal on each of those 3 strikes, you could heal 15% of your health up right there. And that's something that compounds with the Recovery Mastery as well, which is really cool. Now, the Special Attack 2 is where there's possibly some application for Venom potentially becoming somewhat of a threat again on Alliance War defense, because each of these buffs that he has on him, so it doesn't matter if it's an armor buff or a physical resistance buff, a crit buff or whatever, any of those buffs that he has active upon activating a special 3 get converted into a Fury buff. So if you've got a fully loaded Venom that has, and you're facing off against him in Alliance War, and he's sitting on that node, and he has 7 different buffs currently applied to him, not including the ones that may be granted to him based off of the node that he's on. I'm not sure if that would factor in or not. What I've seen with some of the testing is this does tend to work occasionally with dexterity if you can get the special 2 off quickly enough, but you will then have 7 different stacks of Fury to have to equate for. And if that's on an unblockable special 2 node and you accidentally push him over that power threshold, you could be in a real tight spot. So that's something that's really kind of cool. And then after that 12-second timer that's on those buffs, they all expire, and Venom's symbiotic memory will allow him to regenerate new buffs, which you can then rinse and repeat that process with. But of course, if you're looking to use him for damage output, you probably want to hold on to using your special 2 until you have 6 or 7 buffs, or if you've got the Carnage Synergy active, you can get that 8 buff there as well. There actually is one more area where you can gain an additional buff, which we'll touch on just a minute here, and that's with one of the additional synergies that's been added. And then the special 3 doesn't really grant a whole lot extra. The main difference here is instead of having a 100% chance to duplicate up to 2 of the opponent's buffs, you have a 5% damage multiplier for each buff that Venom has active at the time of activating that special 3. So you can get an additional 35, 40, 45% depending on how many of those buffs that you have active. So interesting, but not something that I would particularly use Venom for as far as the potency on his special 3. Now, the things that I do want to highlight with some of these synergies that are really cool is he now has a synergy, one of those unique synergies to just those characters. For Venom, well, Venom gains an additional genetic buff, so that could increase his cap to 9 if you bring him in with a synergy of either Vulture or Green Goblin, as well as Carnage being on that team. You'll also see that Vulture gains additional armor against special attacks if he still has his armor up buff active, which is an active buff unless he has the armor break there on him. So that's kind of interesting. Not really a whole lot to offer in terms of what Vulture has there. And then Green Goblin grants additional attack for each of his Madness and Cunning charges. Not super crazy unless you're running a Green Goblin that is, a 5-star Green Goblin that's rank 4. That's really kind of where that would really pay off in huge dividends, or if you're lucky enough to have a 6-star Green Goblin, then you could potentially notice some things as well. But really, this is a lot more beneficial for Venom than it is for Venom and Green Goblin, but still really cool that that's been added in. And then it appears that Venom has a synergy active with himself, kind of similar to what we've seen with Goldpool, where he gets an additional 4% attack and health, and that's just with any symbiote that's on the team, so this is something that gets added to Carnage as well. Would have to do some research to see exactly if this is something that happens with just Venom on his own, or if another symbiote character such as Aged Venom or Carnage needs to be present on the team in order for that to take place. And then you see he has the same synergies that he had before, some additional crit rating, some additional health, some additional attack, and some additional crit damage, and perfect block with Joe Fixit. So really the best additions that we've seen is with that synergy that he now has with Green Goblin and Vulture that allows him to have an additional genetic memory buff. So with that, I actually have gone into Realm of Legends, and the thing that I kind of wanted to showcase in aspect to Venom's Special 1 is in a matchup with Juggernaut. Now, I'm not going to do the full fight here, because Venom, even with all of these changes, he hasn't really increased that much in terms of damage output, at least for longer fights. For that, I feel like Carnage has definitely had the better buff, with those long, persistent bleeds that refresh themselves, and Carnage is looking like a better option for some of those longer fights, just with how those tweaks have been made to him. But I wanted to showcase Venom's Special 1 in a matchup here against Juggernaut, especially this Realm of Legends Juggernaut, where it's just super annoying and the fight tends to be drawn out for long periods of time because each time he activates a special attack, he goes unstoppable. And unless you've got Blade, or if you're really patient and using a Quake, there really isn't a good way to counter that. So we'll just kind of jump in and have a look with of how Venom's Special 1 can interact with Juggernaut's Unstoppable buff. And I've done some testing with this previously. Hopefully I don't play like a total scrub here. But you'll see right off the bat we have those 3 buffs, a bit of some crit damage, and then that armor buff, so nothing super crazy. I kind of want to build up a couple of more buffs, and you can see that timer that's ticking itself through, and that lets me know right before I've got each of the different buffs that can become active. And you'll see that the bleeds are a lot more frequent than they used to be. You'll see that I've currently got those 4 buffs, and I'm about to get the 9th one. So now, I've got an additional 45% damage that I can get off of my special attack, or that special 3, so I can go ahead and pop that. And then we'll build up to a special 2 and unleash that and kind of show you how that interacts. And then I want to demonstrate at least the interaction between Juggernaut's Unstoppable buff and the special 1 that Venom has here before moving forward and doing a little bit of some more showcasing. Okay, so I've got that special 2, and we're going to go ahead and launch it at the end of this combo. So you see I've got those 9 Furies, so a couple of decent crits in there. I personally feel like the timer on these Furies is too short because you can maybe get in 2 combos if you're feeling lucky. Now you'll see there that I was able to steal not only his Fury buff but also his Unstoppable buff there. And that allowed me to heal up for 10% health, which is really kind of cool, especially with as aggressive as Juggernaut can get sometimes. So there goes his Unstoppable, there goes his Fury buff, and I just gained 10% more health there. So really kind of an interesting way that interacts. Now, with how these buffs tend to cycle, you would not really want to use, I mean, not that you would want to use Venom in the current state of the game against any Mystic characters, but this would really make him even more susceptible to Mystic Dispersion. As far as, if you trigger your special 1 at the wrong time, or your special 2 at the wrong time, you could just convert all of your current buffs into Furies and really kind of find yourself in a bit of a pickle. But yeah, that's really kind of what I wanted to showcase, at least with this fight with Juggernaut. So you can get rid of his Unstoppable buff and heal yourself up, and that really interacts with any of those other types of buffs. So that's about all I wanted to show with this fight, but I do want to take Venom in and just kind of show how that works in your favor for some of the other fights, particularly that Venom that's in Act 3 that I mentioned, or Act 4, Chapter 3 that I mentioned. Just realized that I needed to back out of that quest in order to be able to use him in this next piece of content. But just kind of show you the benefit that you can have from that special 1 against a character who has a lot of different buffs. And the cool thing about this beta is that the Venom that we will go up against, it actually has these changes integrated as well. So you'll see here, we'll just kind of take this short path and go right up into him. And then you'll see that they both interact the same way as far as how those buffs and timers work out. So we'll go ahead and jump in. And this is where this fight could really get scary if you let this Venom get to his special 2, provided that all of these buffs that just kind of cycle on and off can get converted into Furies. If this node that he's on that allows him to get up to 20 buffs, and then additionally the physical and energy resistance that he builds up, that could wreck your day, especially for some of the newer players, because this is a relatively early piece of content to be dealing with. So that could just really mess you up if you're not good at baiting those special 1s, or if you can't get out of reach of that special 2. You'll see that we're not really having too big of an issue. I'm going to go ahead and take some blocked hits here, just so we can see. And there's that armor break that I'm not a huge fan of using. But let's go ahead and get off a special 1, just to see how many of those we can get back. It looks like we may have nullified 1 or 2 buffs. Alright, so it looks like he only will get those, the only buffs that he will convert are his own, which is definitely useful. And then you saw on that last little bit of those hits there that that special attack became unblockable because Venom was below that health threshold. So if you're going up against a fight where you have lots of different buffs that are ticking through, Venom could very easily be an option. And he's definitely a lot better for some of the shorter fights, I feel. But again, I feel like Carnage has gotten a little bit of the better deal as far as dealing with some of the longer fights. I mean, if you were feeling particularly adventurous, you could possibly even look at using Carnage for some of the longer pieces of endgame content where the characters have large amounts of health. I'm thinking that just based off of how Carnage's bleeds work, you could potentially use him as a counter to characters who have regen. Probably not Realm of Legends Winter Soldier, just based off of how crazy his regen gets. But in terms of damage output, I feel like Carnage has been favored a little bit more than Venom has, but Venom has definitely received some much more interesting utility. So that's just kind of the overview for both of those characters. I hope that's been insightful. I think if I were to make a suggestion, which I will with this beta, and this is something that I'll submit with my kind of report from what I've seen with the characters, but I would really like to see those Furies off of Venom's Special 2 be prolonged a little bit longer so you can get more than just 2 standard 5-hit combos in off of them, because that just feels too short to make using that Special 2 worth it. Maybe I'm wrong. But I'd like to see at least, maybe another 5 or 7 seconds added onto that, just so you can get a little more value out of using a Special 2 and having to start from the ground up with refreshing all of those buffs. So those are just kind of my thoughts, but let me know what you think, and if you have any other questions, feel free to shoot them my way. I hope this was helpful and instructive. Thanks again to Kabam for allowing me to be a part in this beta and just kind of having a general first glance at these characters. I'm really excited to see these additions be made into the new game. But other than that, hope you enjoyed. Thanks for watching. Have a fantastic day.